everybody, in this video we will be talking primarily about expansion and a little bit on early Christian texts at the end. Okay, so expansion. The church expanded very quickly after the death of Christ. What follows is this overview of the expansion, and we're going to visit different places where Christianity really took off. Keep in mind that sometimes it's a little hard to sort fact from fiction through these years, and I'll highlight moments when that is the case. So let's start in Syria. Okay, Syria, the birthplace of Christianity. Okay, there's three major kind of cities, Antioch, Damascus, and Edessa, that all play a prominent role in early Christianity. A number of Christians who fled Jerusalem went to Syria. The term Christianity was perhaps first coined in Antioch. Paul was blinded on the way to Damascus, and the Gospel of Matthew may have been written there. A number of other early writings were composed in Syria. These were written in Syriac, which is a language that is related to Aramaic, but it is a distinct language. Syriac became the Christian language of choice in Syria, Mesopotamia, Persia, and eventually, interestingly enough, India, Mongolia, and China. Characteristics of Syrian Christianity include hymnody and literature that was more prominent than like philosophy, which is much more prominent, you say, in the Greek areas, okay, which we'll talk about in a second. There was a strong emphasis on the humanity of Jesus. There was more emphasis on spirit as opposed to, say, logos. There was the distinctive use of the feminine, like the Holy Spirit as feminine. And early liturgy refers to God as both Father and Mother. There are also explicit examples that come from hymns like the Odes of Solomon, where Jesus says, I fashioned their members and my breast I prepared for them, that they might drink my holy milk and live by it. Okay, I'm hoping as we go through these, you start to see that there are differences in kind of style, in practice, in theological concepts between these places, okay? It's not like it's radically different, but there's just different emphases, which makes sense because these are different cultures and people are speaking different languages from place to place. All right, major figure in Syrian Christianity is Ignatius of Antioch. We have a picture of his martyrdom up on the screen. Ignatius was the bishop of Antioch, and Antioch did not have many freedoms. Okay, it was a place where there was quite a few persecutions. Okay, Ignatius had a very high regard for the episcopal office. Okay, almost immediately we're starting to see defined features, the deacons, priests, bishops in the church. Okay. Ignatius was very clearly a well-respected bishop. He held the bishopship in a very old Christian city. I mean, Christianity is still relatively new here, but this is about as old as you can get, okay? His nickname was actually the Bearer of God. Later, people started referring to him as the one who was born by God. Thus, this legend became that he was actually the child that Jesus picked up in the Gospels. He was martyred in Rome. He was killed in the arena, as many of the early martyrs was. This was not an uncommon death for early Christians. And if you are so interested, his letters are found on the pages 3 to 5 in your Coakley and Sturck reader, where he really talks about the authority of the bishops. Okay. Next place I want to kind of stop in our global tour of early Christianity is Greece and Asia Minor. It's clear that Christianity grew quickly in this area, as attested by Paul's letters. It seems that John and Philip also settled near Ephesus. It is well accepted in the early church that John, as in the Apostle John, had fled Jerusalem in the 60s and lived in Ephesus until he was very old. According to Irenaeus of Lyon, Polycarp, who was his teacher, had told him stories of John in Ephesus. All right, so why this is significant is you are already seeing claims at apostolic succession, okay? John educated Polycarp in the faith. Polycarp is educating Irenaeus in the faith, okay? So claiming like the knowledge back to the apostles, okay? Also in Asia Minor was the apostle Philip, and he had 2 daughters that were known as prophets in the early church. All right, expansion in the Western. All right, expansion into the Western Mediterranean. It's clear that the city of Rome had a significant Christian population already in like the 50s when Paul wrote to them. Rome did have apostolic connections. Both Paul and Peter most likely died there, and tradition places Peter as the bishop of Rome. The first Roman Christians were typically a more working class, which shouldn't be surprising. Their language was Greek, while the elite spoke Latin, and the church was bilingual into the 3rd century. If you think about it, it still is. We still have the Latin West and the Greek East, and we will talk about that plenty over the next 10 weeks. There were occasional persecutions in Rome. We'll talk more about that next week. Leadership is a little difficult to trace in the early years for Rome. In the year 189, a man named Victor became the bishop of Rome. After that, there's a very clear pattern of succession in that office. But before then, it's a little bit fuzzy. No, this should not be terribly surprising that there is a lack of consistent leadership. Between the persecutions and the martyrdom, things were really unstable. But obviously the Bishop of Rome will continue to play a significant role in the church. And note the language I'm using here. I am calling him the Bishop of Rome at this point and not the term the Pope, which comes about a little later. Also worth noting is debates over Easter and when to celebrate Easter. This is a pretty consistent fight. In fact, it's still a fight in the church today. The Eastern churches and the Western churches celebrated on different days. So in the early church, there was a real power struggle between the Bishop of Rome and the churches of Asia Minor. Christians in Asia Minor celebrated Easter on the 14th day of Nisan, which is a Jewish month, which is Passover. Okay, they claim that this originated with the Apostle John. Most other Christians, though, celebrated Easter on the Sunday following the 14th of Nisan to correspond with the resurrection. Both dates were celebrated by different groups in Rome. And just think about this logistically. When you have different Christians celebrating Easter on certain days, you're fasting and feasting on different days, it gets to be pretty confused. So when Victor became Bishop of Rome, he had a conference where he called all the local bishops and told them to do the same. They exchanged a bunch of letters, and it was decided that Christians would celebrate Easter on Sunday. The churches in Asia Minor refused to do this, and then Victor excommunicated them. Okay, Irenaeus of Lyon wrote encouraging Victor to allow diversity in belief. We don't know what Victor did in the end, but it is important to note here that you are seeing the Bishop of Rome asserting authority over other churches this early on. Okay. All right, let's look at Alexandria. Alexandria was the preeminent kind of intellectual city in the Mediterranean world in the 1st century. It was a big city. The population was probably 300,000 people. It had, of course, the great library of Alexandria. It was truly a cosmopolitan city. It had a very large Jewish population, which would occasionally face persecutions, and most of the early Christians probably came from that Jewish population. Okay, we'll be spending more time in Egypt in the upcoming weeks. But of note here, Alexandria was the home of Philo, a Jewish theologian who had tried to reconcile Plato and Moses. And to do this, Philo had to read scriptures allegorically. Hebrews does this in a similar manner. And the theme of Jesus as a divine teacher of salvation really becomes part of Alexandrian theology. Tradition places Mark there, that he preached the gospel in Alexandria. And here's kind of an interesting story. According to a letter that's credited to Clement of Alexandria, Mark even wrote his gospel in Rome. And then after Peter died, Mark came to Alexandria, where he allegedly wrote a longer gospel. If it was ever written, it is long, long gone, but it's kind of one of those like mysteries. Did it happen? I don't know. Was there ever a secret gospel of Mark? Who knows? It's one of those kind of mystery fact fiction. There's really no way to know, 1800 years after the fact or 1900 years after the fact. Okay. But this does sort of fit well into this sort of secret knowledge culture of Alexandria. All right, India, there is actually some evidence that the Apostle Thomas did go to India. He certainly could have. There was trade between Rome and India, and the apocryphal text, the Acts of Thomas, probably written like the 3rd or 4th century, recounts his journey there. And then according to Indian tradition, Thomas landed in South India in the year 52. Either way, whether it's true or not, these stories show how seriously the early church took the Great Commission. However, there really was not any significant Christian presence in India until like the 4th century. All right, let me just real quick talk a little bit about some early Christian texts here. We'll talk about different ones next week, but here I want to talk about Gospels, all right? We know of as many as 30 different books that could have been classified as Gospels, which were written in probably the first 3 centuries of the church. Most are only known to us in fragments, though there are still some that you can read. Obviously, there were 4 that were recognized as being canon. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we know them well, okay? And they were accepted by the majority of the Christian churches. Okay, other gospels were accepted by certain Christian communities, but not the majority. And then there are other gospels that were just plain rejected, really on theological grounds. And then there are some gospels that we know existed at one point, like the Gospel of the Hebrews or the Gospel of the Egyptians. They're just completely gone. We don't know what's in them. We just know they existed because of references in other ancient writings. So like up on the screen, I have the Proto Gospel of James. This is a good example of a book that was not accepted universally in the canon, but it has been useful to different Christian groups, and there actually are some Christian churches that do accept it as canon. In this book, it's not really so much about Jesus. It's all about the Virgin Mary, about her conception, her childhood, and her experiences giving birth to Jesus. Okay, if you ever read that one, there's pieces of it that'll feel familiar to you because the content has kind of worked its way in to kind of the Christian culture, Christian kind of larger beliefs. Okay. And then there are the Gospels that are just plain rejected, like the Gospel of Thomas, which is on page 5 of your reader. This gospel, it was lost for a long time, and it was actually recently found. But when you look at it, you can kind of see why it wasn't included. When you read through it, there'll be some things that feel really, really familiar, and there'll be other things that'll make you stop and go, whoa, this is wild. This doesn't seem like something Jesus would say, maybe. Okay, so this gospel didn't make the cut for a couple of reasons. Unlike Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Thomas is actually just a list of sayings. It's not a narrative. And it really falls into the genre of like Christian Gnosticism, which we are going to talk about a lot more next week. And so we'll get into that then. But I just wanted to make you aware that there were lots of writings out there, and they kind of serve different purposes in the early church. And unfortunately, a number of them are lost today. All right, I'm going to wrap this video up. I have gone on enough. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, thank you very much. Bye.